If you're somebody that is an entrepreneur, a business owner, you want to set up your company in a way that you can, if you want to, sell it for the most amount of money possible, this is going to be an amazing episode for you guys.
I was sort of thinking revenue was our main objective to make it more valuable. And we had about 5 or 6 million in revenue, 25 employees, but profitable, 20, 30% profit margins each year. So it was a good business. So I thought, man, this is going to be great. Someone's going to want to buy my client list. An M&A guy, a guy named Perry Miele, mergers and acquisitions professional in Toronto. And I said, what do you think it's worth? And I was going to rub it in my hands together, expecting him to come up with some, huge number. And he said, well, actually, before I answer that, let me ask you a couple of questions. I said, shoot. And he said, all right. So who does the research? And I'm like, well, I'm involved in the research. It's like Bank of America. Of course, I've got to be involved. He's like, all right, well, who does the selling? And I'm like, okay, I gotta go see Bank of. It's like I can't send somebody else. And he said, well, that's fine, John, but I can't sell your company. It's worthless. And I'm like, but Perry, we've got 20, 30% profit margins. We got all these clients and the revenue and the product. See, none of that matters if your business is dependent on you. I can't sell it. And it was like being hit between the eyes when it kind of landed on me, but it triggered a sequence of sort of me learning about what does drive the value of a company and what do acquirers want. Ultimately, that a company, with Perry's help and others, we kind of transitioned the business to a subscription model. Ultimately, we sold it to a New York Stock Exchange listed company. It was a successful exit, and happy to get into that. But the kind of main moral of the story was that's what triggered me to kind of learn about what does drive the value of a company. Because if it's not revenue and it's not client list, well, what is it? And that's kind of what we spend our time on.
Well, let's talk about that. If it's not revenue and it's not the client list, right? Those obviously are important pieces, or at least, that's what I think a lot of people believe, are at least variables in the equation of a successful business. But from your perspective, what is it?
Yeah, look, I think, when you think about the value of a company, I'm going to distill a very complicated science down to some basic tenets. One is that it's usually a multiple of your profit, right? So typical business we work with would start with us at around 3.5 times pre-tax profit. And most people myopically focus on the profit. Okay, I've got to get my profit up in order to make my business more valuable. The actual secret is to focus on the multiple. Because you can take the same company, and it's in many cases much harder to grow the profit, but it can be much easier to grow the multiple. And the multiple is determined by different things other than the ones we always think about. One of the biggest drivers of your multiple is going to be recurring revenue, right? So you're in the hotel space, you've got recurring revenue, right? If you've got regular tenants in any sort of real estate play, you've got recurring revenue. Software companies have recurring revenue. I even heard of an example. Are you a guitar player?
I'm not. I wish I was.
Okay, nor am I. My son plays guitar, so I kind of know a little bit about it. But Fender has come out with a cool subscription offering, right? So you want to learn how to play guitar? Guess what? You could subscribe to Fender. Now, what does that do? Number one, it gives Fender a new recurring revenue stream, but they're into selling like hundreds, $1,000 guitars. So you think, but why would they care about $10, $20 a month? Not only does it give you recurring revenue, it also makes that subscriber way more likely to buy another Fender guitar. And it makes the company more valuable, like kind of 2, 3, 4 times more valuable in some cases, depending on the industry. So one of the 8 drivers is going to be how much recurring revenue you have. And it has nothing to do with your profitability. It has everything to do with how sustainable your company is over time.
Recurring revenue being a key piece, right? And I think that's obviously something that, a lot of businesses struggle with, right? It's these feast or famine type of seasons based on whether you're a service or a product or really whatever it may be. And so I'd love to how do you guys audit whether this is a company that's already existing, they're already in place, how do they audit the overall health or value of, let's just say, their ability to be a sellable company? And maybe to tail off of that a little bit as well as, what are some of the variables that business owners or entrepreneurs who are thinking about starting a business should start pouring their foundation with from day one?
Yeah, for sure. So look, I mean, that's what we do. We assess companies. Valuability questionnaire includes 32 different questions, and we spit out a result that gives you a score on 8 dimensions. Probably the first step, though, is thinking through your monopoly control. And this is one of the other key drivers. So, Warren Buffett talks about he invests in companies with a deep and wide competitive moat, right? Competitive differentiation. Why? Because it gives you pricing authority, more pricing authority, better margins, you get more money to invest in sales and marketing. You kind of thicken and widen that competitive moat. And so that's what in many cases makes a company irresistible to acquirers. And it's not for some sort of fanciful reason. When an acquirer makes a decision to buy a business, they go in a boardroom, they close the door, and they decide, do we want to compete head on with this business, or do we want to buy the company? And if you've got something really unique and different that it would take that acquire years to build or many millions of dollars to create, they're going to make the conclusion that it's better just to buy these guys. Whereas if you fall into the trap that so many of us fall into, which is chasing revenue, because you get on the Inc. 5000 list, or you get recognized because you've got a big company, more employees, revenue. The challenge with that is every additional product you sell makes you less and less attractive to an acquirer. I'll give you an example because I think it helps bring it home. I interviewed a woman named Stephanie Breedlove on Built to Sell Radio. She started a company in the payroll space. They did. Have you ever interviewed Stephanie? Do you know her?
No, I don't know Stephanie, but I got a couple good friends in the payroll space, so I'm sure they know of her.
Yeah, they probably do. It's a cool industry. Talk about recurring revenue, right? You got payroll. So she carves out this unique niche. She has kids. She hires a nanny. She's trying to pay the nanny legitimately. And the IRS makes her go through all these hoops to kind of do the paperwork. And she says, hold on a second. Maybe there's a play here where I can set up a payroll company just for parents who have a nanny to pay. Because like all the big payroll providers, they don't want to deal with like one person. But right. So that's what she did. She built a payroll company for just parents who have a nanny to pay. So she gets this business off the ground. She talks to all her friends and mom groups, and she gets a few customers, and she's at $300,000 in revenue. This is a small company. It's just Stephanie and one employee. And she's starting to slow down her growth, right? And because she's sort of worn out all of her contacts and immediate contacts and so forth. And so she thinks, okay, how else can I grow this thing? And she goes to all the conferences. She's reading all the books, and they're all saying, oh, it's like 8 times cheaper and faster to cross-sell a second product to your existing customers, right? And so she's like, well, what else could I sell? These busy parents, like maybe, lawn care services, like meal delivery, like all these other crazy ideas that have nothing to do with what she says. And then she talks to an advisor who says, you know what, Stephanie, think about it from the perspective of the value of your company. Every additional service you offer is going to dilute your unique point of differentiation in the marketplace, making you less attractive to an acquirer. It may make you in the short term bigger, more profitable, but in the long term, it's going to undermine the value of your company. And so she hears this message and she says, okay, I'm going to do the hard thing, which is to grow more slowly and go find more parents who have a nanny to pay. Over 25 years, she builds this company. This is not Tesla. This is not like some rocket ship. This is 25 years. And she gets to 10,000 customers, $9 million in revenue. And she decides she wants to sell it. She goes, looks around and says, well, who would want to buy this company that just does payroll for parents who have a nanny to pay? Care.com is the obvious suitor, right? Care.com, if you don't know, is
makes a lot of sense.
Right? So do you have kids?
I got 2 daughters, yeah.
Okay, so you know the drill, right? You plug in your zip code and it gives you 5-star rated babysitters, nannies in your local market.
Yeah.
They have 7 million subscribers. Okay, so 1% of Care's customers buy Breedlove's payroll service. That's 70,000 customers. Breedlove's a $9 million business on the back of 10,000 customers. Long story short, typical service business might trade, if they're lucky, at 1 times revenue. She's at $9 million. She sells for $54 million.
Ooh. Go Stephanie.
It would never have happened had she diluted her point of differentiation by chasing revenue, by cross-selling a bunch of other ancillary services. And And that's one of the biggest mistakes we make as entrepreneurs is we're chasing the wrong goals. We're like, okay, I want to get on the Inc. 5000. Therefore, I got to sell more revenue and I got to go cross sell my existing customers. And we start selling lots of things to a few customers. And that's like the definition of an unsellable company. The inverse is what you want. You want to sell a few things to lots of people. And that sounds like I just said the same thing in a different way. I actually said the exact opposite, right? So most small businesses grow up selling lots of things to just a few customers. Can't sell that business. Very hard to sell that business. The inverse, though, is finding one or two things you can actually get a moat around, a competitive point of differentiation, and go find lots of people who want to buy that product. Because the more you differentiate it, the harder it is going to be to compete with you, the more it makes sense for an acquirer to come in and just say, you know what, we're going to buy this business. Could Care.com have created what Breedlove created? Probably, with enough time, enough money.
Sure.
But man, Breedlove had a 25-year head start.
Yeah.
And Care had an agenda. They wanted to move fast. And so anyways, monopoly control, finding one thing that you can absolutely own and then just doubling down on that is one of the other main ways you can really boost the value of your company.
I love that because I think obviously, right, as an entrepreneur, one of the, biggest curses are, I remember when I was, early in my entrepreneurial journey and I was 22 and one of my first mentors, kind of said, hey, when you're talented, it's very easy to know that you can do a lot of things good.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to have enough discipline to do a few things amazing, world class, right? And so I love that you talk about that because as a business, sometimes we do get distracted by top line revenue growth.
For sure.
But ultimately, that doesn't equal profitability at the end of the day or specialization within a certain niche, which can create more value, more scarcity, more demand around your particular brand, service, product, or business as a whole. So I love that you brought that up. You also talked a little bit about value, the valuing process, right? 1x, 2x, 5x, 10x.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. And is that something that people should be factoring into their business plan and their model, helping them understand based on, what drivers of value are in their particular industry or space and how that might tie into their business plan and what executions they do or don't do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer in thinking about who the ultimate acquirer is likely to be and then looking at making decisions through the lens of that, that portal. I remember I interviewed, and it was a video game maker that had a unique way that they interfaced, and I won't go into all the details of the company, but it was a cool company. But he named it Gaikai. And I was like, why on earth could you name it this weird name? It's like GAI, KAI. Like, it made no sense. And he named all his servers all after all these Japanese kind of mantras and phrases and colloquialisms. And I'm like, what is with that? He's an American guy based in California. And I'm like, actually, he's originally Irish. David Perry's his name. But he was based in California. So I'm like, what's that with that? And he's like, I knew Sony would be the most likely acquirer for my company. And so I wanted to name it something that would sound Japanese. I'm like, you did that from the day, like before you even started the company, you named the company, like, because you were thinking about Sony as the potential acquirer. He's like, yeah, that's what you have to do if you want to build a valuable company. And I was just blown away by that. But that's the kind of thing that you do. So to answer your question, valuation, like how do companies value your business? There's sort of three traditional ways. Book value is how you might value a piece of residential real estate, right? It's the cost of the actual asset itself, right? What most people want to do in a business is they want to get goodwill, which is the additional value above the asset value. The book value is the definition of goodwill. So that means you're trying to maximize goodwill as an entrepreneur. And so, there's two ways to do that, or two valuation techniques. One is comparables. So looking at, a SaaS company, hey, this SaaS company of this size growing at this rate trades at this multiple of revenue. We should trade at a similar revenue. So looking at other companies in your industry. And then the third way is what's called discounted cash flow, which is essentially taking your profits and discounting them back, projecting them out of the future, and then saying, what's the time value of money represent? It's a fairly complicated DCF calculation. You can Google it later. But effectively, I think what what your listeners should take away, I think, if they want to understand valuation is you've got sort of two big levers when it comes to a financial buyer. I should back up. There's strategic buyers who are like Care buying Breedlove's company. That's a strategic acquisition where they have some strategic assets. Financial buyers are buying your future stream of profit. And most deals are not the spectacular Stephanie Breedlove acquisition. And most of them are financial buyers, right? They're buying a future stream of profit. And so the way you drive that up and down is by making your future stream of profit more impressive, i.e. more profits in the future, right, and making them more reliable. So the more reliable through things like recurring revenue, you're going to see that your valuation goes up. So those are the two drivers that are going to be important to a financial buyer.
I love that you begin with the end in mind, right?
Yeah.
Skate to where you think the puck is going to be at and work backwards from there, because that's really going to help you, one, with that clarity, kind of create the best roadmap and stepping stones, or at least what breadcrumbs you might want to be following along the path to, the end destination, so to speak. One of the things that I always, share with people, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this, is there a perfect business model? And when I say that is, I think the perfect business model is based on what the particular business owner is trying to get out of the business. What are your thoughts on that, right? Because I often hear like, well, this person is doing that and that is dropping more profitability, let's say, to the bottom line, and maybe their company is more valuable, but that person's working 100 hours a week. They don't see their family. They don't have the best lifestyle. Their health is, suffering because of it, but their business is thriving. And then you might have somebody who's maybe half the amount of revenue or profitability, but they've got this balance and this happiness and fulfillment, and they're, not essentially bankrupt in other areas of their life, even though maybe their business isn't as big. What are your thoughts around like business models suiting people for their lifestyle and not necessarily for sale?
Yeah, that's a really great question. We've done a bunch of research at Value Builder, and we've distilled the typical psychographic makeup. In other words, we study motivations, like why people start a business as opposed to going to work for Procter & Gamble or whatever. And we've distilled it down to 3 psychographic profiles, and we call them craftspeople, mountain climbers, and freedom fighters. And one of the things I just encourage people to think about, even before you start a business, certainly on your journey, is to think about which of these profiles you most closely represent, because that can also inform the business model you're going to be best served to use. So a craftsperson is motivated by mastery. So they love being acknowledged for what it is they do. They're the incredible massage therapist, right? Who you would never, go a week without seeing. They're the amazing copywriter, the photographer, the carpenter, the plumber, who just is a master of their craft, right? But they're not an entrepreneur. They don't identify as an entrepreneur. IRS calls them an entrepreneur. They have to file a business tax return, but they don't think of themselves that way, right? They have a mastery of a craft. They typically don't have employees, and they're going to be really happy doing the work. Michael Gerber, famous E-Myth guy, talks about working in, not in, on a business, not in a business. In the case of craftspeople, they're going to be happiest working in the business. They're not going to be building a very successful company that you could sell that's going to be on the cover of Inc. magazine, but they will be happy doing the work. The second group, I'll actually talk about freedom fighters second, because they're generally a little closer to craftspeople. They're motivated by independence. And so for a freedom fighter, their highest aspiration is total and utter financial independence. They want to choose to work, not to be told to work, not have to work. That doesn't mean they don't want to work or not have a business or job, but they want to know they could decide not to work. And so for them, they can't stand being controlled, right? So you've heard of entrepreneurs being control freaks. I'm sure heard that that old adage. Freedom fighters are your control freaks, right? They don't want to be told what to do. And as a result, they don't want investors. They don't want outside advisors. They don't want a big line of credit with the bank that they have to send monthly reports to, because all those things serve to undermine their independence, their sense of pure personal freedom. So again, if I was coaching a freedom fighter and they were saying, "Hey, I'm thinking of I'm syndicating a bunch of debt over here because we're going to raise this big," I'd be like, hold on, time out a second. Like everything I know about who you are as a person, do you value freedom over everything else? Do you really want a bunch of nosy investors asking you for, your statements each month? And not to say investors are nosy, but you know what I mean? Like people,
there's a different level of accountability, right? That's required. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And then the third group are mountain climbers. Mountain climbers are motivated to grow and achieve. They are motivated to grow the next big company. You've got three hotels on the go. And if I had to guess, I might think you're a mountain climber, right? For you want to make a big dent in the world. You want to have a big impact. You want to achieve something really special and have an impact. And for those types of people, they're motivated by achievement. Right. So you like to win and compete. And so for you, having a lifestyle business is probably going to be boring. It's going to be probably frustrating if you keep getting sucked into being asked to do the work, right? You're like, I have people do the work. I don't want to be doing the work, right? I want to be building, creating. Yeah, right. And that's a mountain climber attitude. And so for those types of businesses, they're going to be best served with fast growth, scalable, oftentimes tech-enabled or technology-enabled businesses where you can get that big impact. So those are the three psychographics, and then hopefully some ideas around kind of the perfect business model. To your point, I don't think there's a perfect business model, but there probably is some better business models based on just some self-reflection on who you are as a person. Once somebody invests in your company is for sale. Right. There's an old adage that you have to get those investors a return on their money. Right. So you take outside money, even if it's just a few $100,000 from friends and family or a few $1,000s from friends and family, all of a sudden you flipped a switch and a clock starts counting down, right? Yep. Those investors, whether they're friends, family, or institutional investors, they want a return. And the only way you're going to give them a return is to sell your company. And if you don't want that pressure, you shouldn't bring on investors. And that's, again, one of the things that I think we have to learn as early as possible, because it can really inform the business model you use based on sort of your own headspace.
What are some of the best frameworks that you've seen of the many businesses that you guys have seen, studied, been a part of, exited? What are some of those good business frameworks? And maybe it doesn't have to be necessarily a title of one specific one, but maybe some common denominators or threads that have been seen present in very successful businesses that are built to sell.
Yeah. So one of the common themes, I think most CEOs and entrepreneurs should have the same aspiration for their company. That success is that your company can go out into the world and thrive without you. That doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
For parents, it takes 20 years, right? It may take you that long in a business, but that's the aspiration I think entrepreneurs should have, is that regardless of how big or small your company is, if it can thrive without you, you've given life to the world. You've brought something into the world that doesn't depend on you. And I think that will give entrepreneurs an enormous degree of satisfaction, just like it does parents. To see your kid go off and do something without you is just incredibly rewarding, right? Yeah. And I think for entrepreneurs, you will find that incredibly rewarding to see somebody else make a sale, somebody else serve a customer just as well, even better than you would have done. I mean, that's a glorious feeling. Standard operating procedures is not a new term for folks, right? But it's basically instructions for how you would want something done in your company when you're not there effectively, right? Like, what are the steps that people need to take? You don't have to want to sell to have standard operating procedures, right? You have to want your company to grow beyond your involvement. And I think that can be just a really good best practice to focus on.
Yeah, I love that, because I think that is extremely important to not being, well, one, business owners ultimately. And of course, yes, you want to be in the business and we love being important and, people wanting us and needing us. But at the end of the day, you want to get to a point where you can fire yourself out of the company and it's still not only operating, but it is thriving without you. And that's when I think, right, you built a real business, which is ultimately, at least what many entrepreneurs and business owners tell themselves is the reason why they get into business for in the first place, right? Is to create this vehicle that makes impact, makes money, brings value to the world, to your employees, to your community, whatever, your space is. and ultimately allows you to go off and do whatever the heck you want to do, when you want to do it, with who you want to do it with.
And we asked business owners, what's their definition of wealthy? And we gave them 3 choices. So we locked them into 3 potential choices. So we didn't do it open-ended. We said, choice number 1 is someone with $10 million of investable asset. Option number 2 is someone who has enough money to pay their lifestyle expenses for the rest of their life. Option number 3 is someone who has enough money to do whatever they want, whenever they want to. 15% said it was 10 million. Another 30% said it was enough money to cover your lifestyle for the rest. The rest of folks, like 55%, said it was enough money to do whatever I want, whenever I want to. And that's freedom, right? It's FU money. It's basically financial independence. I'm reminded, and here's the thing. I think what we do as entrepreneurs is we often ride it over the top, meaning we build businesses that are successful enough to create that amount of liquid wealth, to have that amount of freedom, yet we refuse to sell it. And for a lot of people listening to this, if you look back at your own life and you say, how much of my net worth is tied up in my business? When you first started, it was probably negligible, right?
Yeah, right.
Right? Now, it's probably a big proportion of your net worth if you've been at it for a while. And every day you hold on to all those shares in your company, even though on paper it might be a lot of wealth, you're basically at the poker table going all in every day, right? And have you ever had Rand Fishkin on the show?
I have not.
Okay, so Rand, you should have him. He's a great guest. He wrote a great book called Lost and Founder.
Okay.
It's a great book. But anyways, Rand built a business called SEO Moz. They were in the SEO space. It's a great little software product. Built it up to $5 million revenue, and he got a call from Brian Halligan, the co-founder of HubSpot. And they said, "Look, we don't have any SEO solution. We want to buy your company." And he offered him 5 times top line revenue, so like $25 million bucks. And Rand says, well, I appreciate the offer, but we're on our way. We're at 5 now, but we think we'll be at 10 this time next year. And I've heard SaaS companies like mine should trade around 4 times revenue, so I want 40. It's for a $5 million company. And Brian Halligan says, I can't pay you 40 for a $5 million company. And they part ways. And instead, Rand says, okay, well, he raised a bunch of venture capital. The VCs encouraged him to get in a bunch of different product lines. You know the rest of the story, right? The product lines started to fail. The company started to bleed cash. Rand was actually removed as the CEO of the company.
Wow. And
the VCs brought in new management. And I interviewed Rand after the fact, and I said, well, at least you've got all the Moz stock. I mean, even though you're not running the company, you're still going to have a huge exit one day. And he said, no, probably not. Like, what are you talking about? He's like, the way the VCs invested, they use preferred shares. And because of the length of time they've held, they're going to get a preferred return, which is likely going to wash me out of any equity whatsoever. In other words, mine will go to 0. And I said, but Rand, what would that offer from HubSpot be worth today based on what's happened to HubSpot stock in the last 5 years? He said it would probably be worth close to $200 million. Because the deal was that Rand was being offered was a mixture of cash and stock in HubSpot. And so, that's a very dramatic example of this concept of riding it over the top. And as entrepreneurs, we're super optimistic, right? We think tomorrow's always going to be better than today. It's going to hopium. Right. And that's natural. That's what makes us great at what we do, frankly. Yeah. But it also makes us susceptible to riding it over the top. And I would just encourage people listening just to do the math and say, okay, if I started this company, my goal was to build enough wealth to do whatever I want, whenever I want to. And if I sold my company after paying taxes and commissions, also, I would have that. Why am I continuing?
Yeah.
Now, you may have other reasons to continue. You may want to, there may be all kinds of altruistic reasons you want to build your business larger than it is today. That's cool and totally understand. But I think it's worth a quiet moment over a, glass of wine or whatever your thing is to just reflect on, am I willing to continue to risk what I built, financial freedom effectively, if I liquidate it, for something that maybe I don't necessarily want? And
that's a good question. Right? Because I think oftentimes if people really took the time to get clear on that answer, their actions or decisions may be a lot different than what by default, right? Our programming just keeps us, through habit or through traction, moving in one particular direction. That may not be aligned with your North Star that you initially started on the journey for in the first place. So I think it's a really great, important question to be asking, because oftentimes I'm just a big believer in clarity and awareness and consistently staying in proximity to the stuff that you say matters to you, whether it's your core values, whether it's your goals, whether it's your marriage, your health, wherever you say you're moving and going towards, auditing those decisions, or at least being aware enough to know when you're off track or you're, in the zone and you're in congruence with doing those things. It makes a big difference. Question for you in terms of all the businesses that you see, to give a little bit more context to people around the importance of patience and diligence and grit, and perseverance over an extended period of time. I'm just a big believer that a lot of small things eventually turn into, when you look up and look in the rearview mirror, something really big. So what is the overall kind of average timeline you see for these, successful businesses? How long does it take for them to get there, so people can really understand, at least contextually, maybe how long they should be thinking about investing time, energy, resources into building something if they want it to be really successful?
Yeah. I mean, this is obviously an unanswerable question in the context of there's all sorts of outlier examples of, WhatsApp gets acquired 3 years after its founding or something like that.
Maybe not necessarily the unicorns, but let's say that the average, big chunk of businesses that we might see mid-size, right? It's kind of that crock pot versus microwave type of mindset, right?
I love that. Anecdotally, I think, and when I say anecdotally, I've done something like 350 episodes of Build to Sell Radio. So I've interviewed lots of entrepreneurs. What I hear, and again, this is just anecdotal, is that there's something somewhat transformative about a 10-year anniversary of a company. Again, I don't know what the 10-year mark means, whether there's they talk about in marriage, you've got a 7-year itch. I don't know if that's a real thing. Maybe it's the 10-year itch for a business owner.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know what it is, but I think there's something about that. I think there's also this point where a business reaches, for some people, it's $1 million in value. Some people it's 5 million. Some people 10, 20, whatever. But the entrepreneur wakes up one day and says, "Oh my gosh, I'm all in, and I need to diversify." Right, and so that happens. That's more likely to happen the longer the longer the business owner has held the company, and the older the owner gets.
What kind of mentality and mindset should someone have in terms of like, I'm going to commit to this for X period of time? Or is it, I'm going to commit to X milestones being hit? What are your thoughts around the overall mentality someone should have when they're committing to building their business, and, what kind of fortitude you're going to need to have, as you go through and, navigate the peaks and valleys that we all know business owners will, no doubt about it, experience at some point in time?
One of the things that you have to, or I try to think about is am I moving forward, even if it's taking me longer than I hoped or wanted it to? Am I moving forward? I'm a big goal guy. Like, those very binary goals take a mental toll, right? Like, when it's specific, you've heard of SMART goals, right? It's like, I want to sell my business, but I think that's great. And those are important to have, yet we can also fall victim of not enjoying any of the journey itself. And so I think there's probably a happy medium there where you've got very SMART goals. So they're time-based, they're specific, et cetera, et cetera. But you also take time to reflect on like the journey itself and the little wins along the way, and know that even if you don't hit the big goal, you probably learn a tremendous amount about yourself along the way. And as long as you're kind of moving forward and still sort of enjoying that process as best you can, like I would stick with it.
Yeah.
When it becomes like, I've got to hit this goal no matter what, and I kind of worry a little bit that is the goal really worth the expense?